What if I told you that Mercedes could lose its entire lead, just before Suzuka, for something that doesn't even clearly break the rules? Because what Ferrari has discovered is not a traditional trap, it is much more dangerous. A loophole in the regulations that Mercedes would have exploited to the limit with its front wing, creating a system that deceives the FIA controls while gaining performance in each corner, and now, that masterstroke could become its worst nightmare. The FIA is already investigating. Red Bull has entered the protest, and if a last-minute technical directive arrives, Mercedes would not only lose its advantage, it could see its entire concept of the car collapse in the middle of the season. The question is, technical genius, or the scandal that can change Formula One in 2026? Mercedes did not arrive at Suzuka as just another team. It arrived as the team that everyone is watching, analyzing, and, above all, questioning, because what until just a few days ago was considered a brilliant technical advantage has now become the center of a storm that mixes engineering, regulations, and politics within the paddock. And the W17 was not only being fast, it was being different, especially in a key area in this new era. The front wing with active aero, an element that in 2026 defines absolutely everything from straight line speed to braking stability and behavior in linked curves. And precisely that is where Ferrari found something that did not fully fit with what the regulations dictate. Because when they began to analyze the data and, above all, the slow motion images of the Chinese Grand Prix, what they detected was not a failure, but a pattern, a repeated behavior that did not follow the logic of a conventional system. The Mercedes front wing did not always change configuration in the same way, nor at the same pace. And that in a regulation as specific as that of the active aero is not a minor detail. It is a warning sign, since the rules are clear. The change between low load and high load mode must be completed in a maximum of 400 milliseconds, a fast, direct transition without interpretations. But what the images showed was something completely different. In certain curves, the system took practically twice as long to complete the complete movement of the front flap, something that in theory should not be possible, unless we are faced with a solution specifically designed to play with that limit. And this is where the problem really begins for Mercedes, because according to the most detailed technical analysis, the team would have developed a system divided into two phases, a first extremely fast one that meets the time required by the FIA and which is what is recorded by the official sensors, and a second slower phase, almost imperceptible, which finishes adjusting the angle of the spoiler to optimize the behavior of the car, which means that, in practice, the car is not changing modes instantly like the rest, but is smoothing out that transition to gain stability and performance, something that on the track translates into a very clear advantage, especially in long braking areas and technical corners where the balance of the car is everything. This system not only allows Mercedes to be faster on the straight by maintaining the low resistance configuration for longer, but it also gives it the ability to introduce aerodynamic load progressively when entering a curve, avoiding that abrupt change that other teams do suffer. And this is key, because while Ferrari and Red Bull have more aggressive transitions that destabilize the car at certain moments, the W17 appears much more predictable, smoother, easier to push to the limit, which explains why drivers like Russell and Antonelli have been able to squeeze the car with so much confidence at the start of the season, finding tense precisely in those areas where others lose control or have to lift their foot slightly. But what seemed like an engineering masterpiece begins to falter the moment Ferrari decides to go further and not just remain in the analysis, but rather raise the situation to the FIA, directly pointing out that this behavior does not respect the spirit of the regulations. Because although the system may be passing the technical verifications in terms of recorded time, in reality it is manipulating the way in which this transition occurs, exploiting a loophole that was not contemplated when the rules were written. And this is the point that changes everything, because in Formula One there is no it only matters what the standard says, but how it is interpreted, and that is where Mercedes is completely exposed right now. The immediate consequence has been a formal investigation that places the German team in the center of attention just before Suzuka. A scenario where the pressure is not only sporting, but also political, because Red Bull has also joined the protests, understanding that if this system is maintained, Mercedes will have a structural advantage that is very difficult to match throughout the season, and that forces the FIA to make a quick decision, even with the possibility of issuing a last-minute technical directive that forces it to modify or directly eliminate this concept, something that could completely change the competitive order in a matter of days. Thus, what we have right now is not only a fast team, but a team on a knife's edge, because Mercedes has built its performance around a solution that could stop being valid at any moment. And if that happens, we are not talking about losing a few tenths, we are talking about having to redefine the complete behavior of the car in the middle of the season, with everything that implies in terms of development. adaptation of the drivers, and direct fight for the championship, making this case one of the most critical moments of the beginning of the era 2026. But this is where everything escalates to a much more serious level, because we are no longer talking just about a technical suspicion, but about a direct war between teams that can redefine the championship, and Ferrari has not limited itself to pointing out the problem, it has put a very clear implicit accusation on the table. Mercedes is not only taking advantage of a vacuum, it is exploiting it in a way that breaks the competitive balance of the category, and that has caused the pressure on the FIA to increase brutally in a matter of hours. From this point on, the situation enters a completely different phase, because when a team like Ferrari detects something like this and decides to formally escalate it, there is no turning back. The issue stops being technical and becomes political, and that is where Mercedes begins to have a much bigger problem than it seems, because now they must not only defend the legality of their system, but also its legitimacy within the paddock in a context where Red Bull has quickly joined the protests, understanding that this is not just a specific advantage but a concept, which, if maintained, could make structural differences throughout the season. And this generates a very dangerous domino effect, because the FIA is now in an extremely delicate position. If it does not act, it is allowing a team to play with the limits of the regulations in a way that others have not been able to replicate, but if it intervenes too quickly, it runs the risk of artificially altering the championship, which puts the credibility of the regulations themselves at stake, and it is precisely this balance that makes the Mercedes case one of the most complex to manage in recent years, since there is no clear infraction, but there is an interpretation that clearly favors a single team. Meanwhile, within Mercedes the situation is much more tense than it seems from the outside, because all of the initial performance of the W17 is built around this system. It is not an add-on, it is not a secondary improvement, it is a central piece of the car's aerodynamic concept, which means that any change forced by the FIA would not only imply losing performance, but completely altering the balance of the car, directly affecting the way in which the drivers attack corners, manage braking, and above all, how they find confidence. To the limit, something that in Formula One is absolutely critical. This is where the risk becomes something real and tangible, because if that dreaded technical directive arrives before Suzuka, Mercedes will not have time to react structurally. It will be forced to introduce emergency changes, provisional solutions that will hardly be able to replicate the behavior they have developed for months, and this in a circuit like Suzuka, where aerodynamic balance in fast and linked corners is essential. It can be directly devastating for their aspirations, going from being the technical reference to a vulnerable team in a matter of an end of the year. And while Mercedes deals with this uncertainty, Ferrari has achieved something even more important than a possible sanction. It has changed the narrative, it has questioned the legitimacy of its rival's dominance, it has forced everyone to look closely at every detail of the W17, and that in Formula One is a very powerful weapon, because from now on every performance, every improvement, every result of Mercedes will be under suspicion, generating constant pressure that not only affects the team on a technical level but also on a mental and strategic level. At this point, the big question is no longer whether the system is legal or not. The real question is how long Mercedes will be able to maintain this advantage before the FIA intervenes, and above all, what will happen when it has to compete without it, because if this trick disappears, we could be facing a radical change in the competitive order, one that would not only benefit Ferrari, but would completely reopen the fight at the top of the championship, just at the moment where every detail begins to make a difference. And this is where everything reaches its most critical point, because Mercedes no longer controls the situation, and that in Formula One is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a team that aspires to dominate, since the outcome of this story does not depend solely on its performance on the track, but on an external decision that can change absolutely everything from one moment to the next, and that is that the FIA now has in its hands the ability to redefine the balance of the championship with a single technical directive. If that directive arrives before Suzuka, the blow for Mercedes can be immediate and brutal, because we are not talking about a minor adjustment, we are talking about eliminating or limiting the system that has been the basis of its competitive advantage, which would force the team to run with a completely different version of its own car, a less refined version, less stable and, above all, much more vulnerable in those areas where they were previously untouchable. And this in such a tight championship is not simply losing performance, it is opening the door for Ferrari and Red Bull to take control of the sports narrative without the need to develop anything extra. But even in the scenario where the FIA does not act immediately, the damage has already been done, because Mercedes has been exposed, its concept has been revealed, analyzed and questioned publicly, and that means that the rest of the teams now have a clear objective, to pressure, replicate, or even force a stricter interpretation of the regulations that ends up neutralizing that advantage, which turns this situation into a long-term battle where each race can be accompanied by new protests, new reviews, and a constant tension that wears down both on and off the track. Furthermore, there is an even deeper factor that could mark the future of this season, and it is the psychological and strategic impact within the Mercedes team itself, because when a car is designed around a specific concept and that concept is called into question, the entire development process enters into crisis. Engineers must rethink decisions, drivers lose references, and the margin of error is reduced to a minimum, generating an environment where each session becomes a test, a constant adaptation to something that is no longer stable, and that in modern Formula One is a disadvantage. Enormous against teams that do have a clear and defined base. Meanwhile, Ferrari has achieved exactly what it was looking for. Not only has it put its direct rival in check, but it has opened a crack in its competitive structure, a crack that can widen with the passing of the races if the FIA decides to intervene or if Mercedes fails to find an alternative solution that maintains its performance without depending on that regulatory vacuum. And this is the true turning point of this whole story, because it is no longer about who has the fastest car, but about who can best adapt to a changing scenario. Constantly. Ferrari, for its part, has played a perfect card. It did not need to be faster, it needed to be smarter, find that void, expose it, and force a reaction that now has the entire paddock pending a decision that could change everything, because if the FIA acts, Mercedes will have to reinvent itself in record time, and if it does not act, the pressure will continue to grow until that system is no longer sustainable politically and sportingly. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.